I'm very privileged today to introduce to you Katie Christofik. Her job was originally focused on a patient-friendly experience for those administering and taking medication. But during the pandemic, it shifted to crisis and internal communication to provide accurate information to employees and their families. I want to congratulate you, Katie, for the publishing of your article titled Lessons Learned as a Caregiver in Authority Magazine.
Thank you.
How did your journey as a caretaker begin?
Sure. My mom was eventually diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. And in the years leading up to that, we noticed changes. And the more changes we noticed, the more it solidified for us that something was going on. So in 2015, she was officially diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Now, I live out of state, not super far away. It's about 100 miles.
May I interrupt you just a moment?
Sure.
What was it like to get that diagnosis?
Oh, uh, it's one of those situations where you don't want to be right,
Yes.
but then you get the confirmation that, yes, this is what we thought we were dealing with. And then once you have that diagnosis, then you know really, what path you need to go on, right? And um, of course, there were so many things that we didn't know, and there was so much that we needed to learn. And it was not as straightforward as it might have been with some other type of diagnosis. We have certain diseases that have a lot of information and a lot of actions you can take. And then there are others where there isn't as much. And unfortunately, dementia falls in that latter category.
And from what I've learned from interviewing others, it's not a predictable path, that
No.
different people have different symptoms, and it's not easy to find out what's going to work for your loved one that maybe worked for others.
That's right. In my experience and in talking with other folks who've walked this path, it's basically as unique as the person themselves.
Really.
So their personality, the things that they are good at and that they like and that they don't like, because all of those things happen in your brain, all of those things get affected in one way or another. Um, and I think that's probably one of the reasons they've had a harder time in the research department in finding something that works.
You started to mention the challenges of living out of state, away from your
Mhm.
mom. How did
Yeah.
you manage that?
I was fortunate in that my dad and my sister, obviously, my dad lived in the same house, and my sister lived in the same town. So they were her primary caregivers, and they did a lot of the day to day hands on care. But I didn't want to be that family member who lived far away and used that as an excuse to not help with the care.
Oh, bless
Um, so I tried to figure out how can I help. It wasn't so far that I couldn't get there on weekends. So I would make freezer meals and take things. So my dad's a good cook, but one of the things you learn really quickly when you're taking care of someone is the grind of having to figure out what to make and the time to make it. And, depending how much care they need or how much supervision they need, you can't always be in the kitchen. And anyway, so I would take freezer meals. And then as things progressed, I sort of looked at it from the same way that I used my remote work experience. Like, what can I do online? I can book appointments. I can network and find information. I can find people who can come and help with snow removal and that kind of stuff and take that off their plate. So, those are the kinds of things you can do even if you're not right there.
That research piece, I imagine it takes a lot of time, and it's
Yeah.
of huge value to the caretakers that are right on site with her, I'm imagining. I have a stepdaughter who's excellent at research, and anytime I need to buy something, I'll say, "Can you find out what the best deal is?" And
Yeah.
it, it's such a relief to have that off my plate because I am not good at it. Your
Yeah.
friend told you you never know how strong you are until you aren't given a choice.
Mhm.
So, how strong did you find out you are?
Well, I didn't have gray hair before all of this started.
Okay, we'll blame the gray
Uh,
hair on being a caregiver.
yeah, there was a very distinct moment. And it was right after my son was born. And it's when I knew for sure that my mom had Alzheimer's disease. We didn't have the diagnosis, but I knew we needed to get the diagnosis. And so I was standing in my dining room at 32 years old with a little one who had just turned 3 and a brand new baby recovering from a C-section
Mm,
and realizing we were, on a path with Alzheimer's disease. And how was I going to do this? I worked full time,
wow.
as many people do. So suddenly I was sandwich generation.
Yes, I started to say sandwich generation,
Yeah.
caught between two different generations that both need extremely uh, time consuming care and
Right.
attention. So, what did you discover about yourself?
That my ability to organize is what saved me.
Yes.
Because on top of that, my mom's mother, my grandma, was still alive.
Wow.
And my great aunt, who had never married and did not have any children of her own, she was also still alive.
Mm,
And so my mom, who had taken care of them, could no longer. So really, it was kind of like a club sandwich generation.
yeah.
I had the 2 generations above me, my mom, and then the kids.
And
And so
time,
it
Carol.
was really just organization and communication with my dad and my sister about, who's doing what, who needs what. Um, and my dad had the brunt of the frontline work. So I want to be very clear that,
Yeah.
he did an unbelievable job with what was in front of him. And, my sister, of course, stepped in an incredible way. But when you don't have a choice, you figure things out. That doesn't mean that it's easy. It doesn't mean that it's fun, but you make it work because you have to.
How did you, where did your own self care come into this puzzle? Was
Oh,
there any self care?
there was a lot of thought about self-care and, I should do that, but I didn't know how.
Hmm.
And honestly, before the pandemic, one of the self-care pieces for me was my ability to go to the office
Oh,
because being at the office, it was work. My kids were in school and my dad was taking care of my mom. So if something came up, somebody was sick or something, and I had to leave, okay. But being at the office, I could focus on the work that I was doing
hmm,
and just get away for a little bit. I mean, this is probably too much information, but, especially when you have little kids, like going to the office, nobody follows you into the bathroom at the office.
yes. Well, and it's a very predictable structure. You have
Yes.
predictable tasks to do and rewards. I noticed in your article that you made a decision that whatever I invest my time in, it's got to be worthy.
Yes.
That's quite a life lesson. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. There's always this sort of in the future focus, I think, for a lot of people. I'll get to that. When I retire, I'm going to do this. Um, and the reality is, my mom started her symptoms in her early 60s.
Yes.
So you don't have the time you think you do. Some people, God bless them, some people do,
Yes.
but you just don't know. So I don't want to spend my life going, when I'm in my 60s and I've retired, I'm going to do this. Um, I am much more deliberate about who I spend my time with, where I spend my time, and is this going to be worth it? Or is it going to be, um, is it going to matter 5 years from now, whatever it is that I'm focused on? So it has helped me. I still worry about things, but
Mhm.
I use that now more than I did as a litmus test of, is this worth my time and energy, or is it not?
I find that the older I've gotten, the more conscious I am about what activities give me energy and what activities or people drain my energy. And like you said, I'm far more deliberate about choosing people and activities that feed my energy.
Yes.
You made the statement that there's no such thing as perfection in caregiving. Other caregivers might appreciate hearing how you dealt with the times that were far less than perfect.
Oh my. There, I would imagine it presents itself in lots of different ways depending on your loved one, and the situation. But for me, dealing with dementia in particular and having little kids at the same time, I did not have the patience I always wanted to have, and that any of them deserved from me in the moment. Um, and it is so easy to let that guilt back up on you.
Oh, yeah.
And, um, I mean, perfectionism and perfection is a myth as
Yes.
a whole,
Yes.
but in caregiving, especially, um, is there a right way to put on pants? Sure, there's a front and a back, but that's the right way. Like which leg you start with doesn't matter. How you pull it up doesn't matter. Um, it's the getting over the guilt and being able to forgive yourself for being human and having your own emotions. And there's so much grief that happens during the process. And I think that surprises a lot of people. A lot of folks, I think grief happens with death or with divorce or the loss of, some really big change. And it certainly does, but it can start long before that.
You brought up the term anticipatory grief, and I'm glad you mentioned that because for those who are caretaking and it's a long process, you lose a lot of pieces along the way.
Mhm.
Did you did you find anything in particular that helped you process grief or deal with the feelings of grief?
I think it depends on who you are and how you express yourself.
Hmm.
For me, I write.
Hmm.
So I wrote Facebook posts for, my family and friends. I have a private page, and it's for
Uh-huh.
that reason. It was really a good support system for me. Um, I can process things better as I'm writing them down. Some folks do better if they can talk it through.
Yes.
Um, and, I can do that to a point, but I find I talk myself in circles. I organize my thoughts better if I can write. Um, excuse me. In music, there was so much music, that really resonated with me. And sometimes, someone else can say something better than you can.
Uh-huh.
And then you don't have to take the time and the energy
Uh-huh.
to do that yourself. Somebody already did, and you can just sit there and listen to it and process your emotions.
I'm a writer too, and I've journaled for years. It was so well described when you say with dementia, you say goodbye in pages and then in chapters. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. So I think the one thing that most people think of when they think of someone with dementia is they don't recognize you, right? I mean, that's like the big thing. Um, but there are all these little things leading up to that, you
Yes,
know? It's the first time you call them, and even when you tell them your name on the phone, they're not sure. So my dad got really good at he had photo albums out that she could look at and things. And people who called regularly, he had pictures of them loaded on his phone. So
wow,
when that person called, their picture would show up and he could show it to her and say, "This is who's calling."
yes,
And for a while, that worked. And then she would know and she would hear your voice and it would trigger that connection. So it certainly hurt when she couldn't remember my name.
yes,
Um, you know, the point when you get to you don't get a birthday card in the mail anymore, you
yes,
know. It's those things that happen after someone passes that are big milestones for people who are dealing with that type of grief after someone has passed from something else. In dementia, those firsts happen and you can still go visit the person.
yes,
And that's why it's so hard sometimes to wrap your head around what's going on.
yes. I had another interviewee say that she had to learn to love someone who was not her mother.
Hmm.
Because there had been so many changes in her that she wasn't playing the role that she had always played.
Yes.
I can
Yes.
only imagine how hard that is and how painful that is. You mentioned Facebook posts and the kind of support that you got from friends and family on Facebook. Were there any other areas or people that lent you support during those years?
Oh, sure. Colleagues. I was very open with what was going on um, at work. And not everybody does that. Not everybody is comfortable with that. Not everybody works somewhere that the culture allows for that without, some sort of repercussions. Um, I didn't think too far ahead about that. I am just someone who lives my life out loud.
Uh-huh.
And I had some really wonderful colleagues that I could talk to and were very supportive and, stepped in, as friends, of course, but then they would also get excited about stuff for my kids
Oh,
and show up, in ways for my family, which was just fantastic. So if you can build some sort of a community, whether it's people who live in your apartment building or, people you meet at the dog park or whatever it is, um, finding someone, some group that gets it and understands what you're going through, even if they don't have personal experience with it. If they are just open enough to be able to receive the messages you're sending,
mhm.
that in and of itself can be huge.
I don't know if you've experienced this or not, but I think there's some kind of shame around brain issues that end up affecting mental health versus cancer or I've got a bad cold or my kids are sick or
Yep.
and I wonder if there's a little bit of shame that prevents people from saying my loved one is failing and I'm taking on a heavy role. And
Yeah. Yeah. I think there is shame. I think there is stigma. I think there is a massive lack of understanding about what this group of diseases
yeah,
are and what they do. Um, our experience was, from friends and family having to educate people on what was happening and what's going on to educating people in the medical community. We would go to appointments. My mom fell and broke her wrist, and had to be hospitalized, and talking with various hospital staff. And they would come in. So one of the things that happened fairly early on in my mom's journey was that she lost her ability to speak completely.
wow.
So her ability to speak went fast. She stuttered for like a year. And then it was words here and there that you could string together enough to know what she was saying, and then nothing.
Oh,
And so when she fell and broke her wrist, she couldn't speak. And so we were in the hospital with her, and the number of people who came into her room from, nurses' aides up through physicians and PT and the whole deal. I understand their practice is to come in and confirm your name with your wrist bracelet, right? But she couldn't do that. They would come in, smile, and she could reciprocate the smile. But then they would wait for her to say her name, and we would have to remind them she can't. Just somewhere in the notes, could somebody say this patient's nonverbal?
yeah.
Like, it would change the dynamic. Right.
Oh gosh. And
Yeah.
how frustrating it must have been for her.
Yes. Yes. Because we could talk to her and see in her eyes that there was some level of understanding.
Hmm.
So, in that same hospital visit, while she was there, they said, we'll give her flu shot since she's here. And I said, that's great. I knelt down in front of her, and it's really important with dementia patients that you get eye level with them, because it is so easy for them to get distracted by things that are going on. Um, and there's changes in their vision as well. So you have to get right in front of them and at their level. So I was in front of her and I said, Mom, they're going to give you a shot in your arm. It's going to hurt for a second. And she just kind of nodded. So I held her hands because I had to, unfortunately, sort of help to hold her still. And we sang Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star while she got the shot. But, she sort of understood enough. And it was still the surprise of when the injection went in because it hurts.
You know,
But then it was fine.
the practice of getting down to eye level is what we recommend for children too.
Yes.
So you quoted no someone else you quoted that said, no matter how badly your heart is broken, the world doesn't stop for your grief. Why did that quote catch your attention?
Oh, because every moment of every day, somebody needed something from me. And it was, oh, gosh, my commute, that was really like my time.
Hmm.
And not always, because sometimes there were conference calls that I had to dial in for in the car, and those would really irritate me because I'd be like, seriously,
You're
I
stealing
don't
my time.
I don't get 5 minutes to myself.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so there's the world keeps turning and things keep happening. And when you are grieving, you just need time.
Hmm.
And we unfortunately don't live in a world that grants that. Most companies will give you 3 days bereavement
Yeah.
because, you just snap right out of it after that and it's fine.
Yeah. Right. Well, it's a great quote and a good reminder. Are you able to find any blessings that have been the result of this very trying and strenuous journey you've been on?
Yeah. I am a much more compassionate and patient person than I was before. Not that I didn't have compassion and all of that, I did. But between this journey and becoming a parent, you just see other human beings in a completely different way.
Yes.
Um, and I've always been on a trajectory where I want to invest my time doing something that is going to help other people.
Mhm.
And so at the end of this journey, um, well, the end of my caregiving journey,
Yes.
I should say, I realized that was the time to start my own business, which is helping caregivers and providing resources to caregivers because I couldn't find what I needed. And so many people can't. And if 53 million Americans are going to be unpaid and shouldering the burden
Yes.
of providing care to the people that they love, then they need to be able to find what they need quickly and easily. So that's my new mission.
And gosh, tell us more about this. Is it in a newsletter or a website, or tell me how you're providing all this information?
Sure. So my company is called The Carefulist, and it is a carefully curated list of resources. We have a website that houses the things that we've found to date. I have social channels, so we are featuring different organizations and different products that we found that are really helpful for caregiving. And I also just recently started a podcast where I am talking with other caregivers and sharing their stories. And some of them have gone on to create their own companies, their own products, their own things, because we're all out here kind of floundering, for lack of a better word. And what I love about this moment in time is that people don't want others to go through what we went through, and we want to solve the problem. So in that way, it's exciting. I think it was Drew Barrymore, for whatever reason, I don't know why I remember this, who said, if you have to go through absolute hell, I hope you come out of it having learned something.
And then you're willing to share it.
Right. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for all that you are contributing to this. Almost, well, up until recently, it's been kind of a hidden community out there that didn't get much publicity and wasn't getting very much help. So
Yeah.
thank you for the work you're doing to provide the resources and the community support that has been so necessary in this whole arena of caregiving. And
Well,
again,
and thank you for giving us a voice. I appreciate it.
I am so honored to be able to feature you and others who have learned how strong they are when they didn't have a choice. I'll use that quote. Okay. So her website is Carefullist, CAREFULLIST.com, where you can go to get a touch of all the resources that she has curated on your behalf if you are a caregiver. Katie, thank you so much for joining me here this morning. It's such a privilege to meet you.
Thank you. Likewise, Nancy.
Bye bye. Let's see here.